Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Monday everybody. I trust you had a relaxing weekend and have a productive week ahead. Foreign ministers of the so-called G7 nations, the United States, Japan, the United Kingdom, Germany, France, Italy and Canada, are currently meeting in Japan for 2 days of discussions, and media in both the West and Japan are reporting that diplomats have expressed that tensions over China generally and the Taiwan Strait situation specifically will be high on the agenda. Regular viewers know that these meetings are happening on the heels of Taiwan's Tsai Ing-wen's recent trip to the US, the subsequent PLA military drills around Taiwan, as well as French leader Macron's trip to Beijing and subsequent controversial comments, which we discussed in Saturday's video. The German foreign minister also concluded a China trip over the weekend where she communicated to Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang that a military escalation in the Taiwan Strait would be a, quote, horror scenario, end quote. Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell, who had to postpone his China trip originally scheduled for last week due to testing positive for COVID, speaking to media yesterday, Sunday, expressed that the European nations of the bloc have a unified approach to China, but just use different terms like strategic autonomy and de-risking, suggesting that he was trying to play down Macron's recent comments. He added, quote, if EU wants to speak the language of power, wants to be a political player, and wants to be a new pole, then everything that happens everywhere in the world matters to us. In the Taiwan Strait in particular, we have a specific interest, end quote. Japan's foreign minister, who we remember also visited China earlier this month at an event on Sunday, stressed the importance of communication, expressing, quote, we should continue to communicate with China and cooperate with them on global issues and areas of mutual interest, end quote. Some commentators like to compare and contrast the G7 with the so-called BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Some seeing it as a US-led West versus China-led Rest, others a global North versus global South grouping. Still others, however, argue that the bloc comparisons are of limited use, as the groupings themselves are too loose. A common point for comparison is economic performance. According to data from the World Bank, China's contribution to world economic growth alone from 2013 through 2021 averaged a little over 38% annually versus about 25% from the G7 nations. However, this is growth. In terms of absolute GDP, the G7, driven by the US economy, accounts for approximately 40% of global GDP. In nominal terms, China is 17% in nominal terms, with the BRICS bloc being a little over 20%. Some argue that by 2019, the contributions of the two groupings had become nearly equal, with the G7 contributing 31.5% to global GDP and the BRICS accounting for 30.7%. But this is only the case when nominal GDP is recalculated according to so-called purchasing power parity, PPP, a standard the accuracy and utility of which still divides economists. This particular debate continues, and there is no need for us to wade into it here. We will follow the G7 meeting and any salient results in the coming days. Next up, 2 quick US-China updates on the technology front. Last week, the US Commerce Department added 12 Chinese companies, mainly distributors of electronic components based in Shenzhen and Hong Kong, onto its export control list based on accusations of supporting Russia's military and defense industries. The Chinese companies blacklisted include 3HC Semiconductors, All Parts Trading Co., STK Electronics, Longli Electronic Components, and others. To date, the US Commerce Department has added about 400 entities to the so-called entity list in connection with Russia since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. However, the entity list has also been employed as part of Washington's technology competition with Beijing. In March alone, 28 Chinese companies were added to the entity list, mostly in artificial intelligence and semiconductor sectors. And on this theme, according to a recently published 2022 report on AI talent in China by the Chinese Academy of Labor and Social Security, China only had about 1/5 as many top AI researchers as the US did. Quote, despite boasting nearly 1 million people qualified to work in AI and related industries. End quote. The report found that in 2022, China had 232 so-called top global AI researchers, while the US had over 1,140, about 57% of the global total. The report also concluded that China's AI sector is facing a highly skilled labor shortage of over 300,000 workers, with especially acute shortages in machine learning, natural language processing, and chip design. Next up, the Chinese economy and our regional banks facing a reckoning. Hey guys, if you enjoyed today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit that like button. It's just me making these episodes every day. It's a lot of work, but your guys' support is a huge source of motivation. Subscribing and sharing is a huge help as well, and for those who can go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Okay, we have some mixed news to begin with. Based on new official data, new home prices in March edged up 0.5% month on month after a 0.3% increase in February, marking the fastest pace in 21 months and the third consecutive monthly rise. However, year on year, prices were still down 0.8%. The 11th month of declines on an annual basis. With this mixed news, some commentators remain optimistic, however, that after huge levels of state support and pain in the sector, the market may finally be stabilizing. Quote, "The housing price index shows a trend of stabilization and recovery, fully indicating overall real estate is out of last year's trough." End quote. Others are taking a wait-and-see approach. Quote, "The property sector recovery should be gradual and bumpy due to the challenging demographic trend. Still tight financing conditions for troubled developers and policymakers, long-held stance that housing is for living in, not for speculation." End quote. We remember that on the demand side, household confidence is crawling back, but general demand still remains weak. On the supply side, while developers have been given a lifeline from the state, last year most builders saw massive losses, and this year, almost 1 trillion yuan of offshore and onshore debt comes due. And finally for today, respected China economist Ho Zisong has published an excellent report looking at the increasingly concerning regional banking situation. Let's end today's video with a few of Song's observations in this area. Quote, "Beijing won't tolerate financial disruptions or push for aggressive deleveraging until it is more confident that the economy has stabilized and the 5% growth target attainable, which likely won't happen until at least the third quarter. At that point, Beijing may be sufficiently convinced by economic conditions to pursue aggressive deleveraging that would almost certainly result in regional bank defaults. That's because Beijing won't be able to kick the financial de-risking can down the road in perpetuity, particularly since regional banks are some of the highest levered institutions. Currently, based on our estimate, the average asset-equity ratio of regional banks is higher than 30 based on market valuation. In other words, Chinese regional banks are about as leveraged as US investment banks were before the global financial crisis. According to our estimate, about 1/3, $4 trillion of total local government financing vehicle debt are at risk of potential default, a scale that is too big to be bailed out by the central government. These are serious vulnerabilities that the new leadership needs to deal with, and it is likely one of the key objectives behind revamping the financial regulatory apparatus." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a great Monday, and I will see you all tomorrow.